If you thought name, image, and likeness and the transfer portal were big changes to college athletics, hold on to your butts, buckle your seatbelt, hold on tight, because a complaint from a federal committee could change the face of college athletics as we know it. Could Big Ten athletes become Big Ten employees? Be careful what you wish for. Before we get into all that, just a reminder to subscribe if you haven't already. Big Ten content all offseason long. Always crush that like button to spread the word of Big Ten TED to the masses. This is seismic change, ladies and gentlemen. This is a seismic potential complaint by the NLRB. You've got your Pangea-like world that you've been living in college athletics for 100+ years. And if this complaint were to come to fruition, you're talking about the seismic shift. You're talking about separating into continents and forming a completely different and a completely new college athletics that people 10 years ago, 20 years ago would not recognize 10 years from now and 20 years from now. Before I really get into the ramifications of what it could mean for our beloved Big Ten Conference and the athletes within it and college sports as a whole, I got to break down the complaint specifically. It comes from the NLRB, National Labor Relations Board. This is a federal committee. This is a complaint. This is not a lawsuit. They're talking about a cease and desist from misclassifying the players as non-employee student athletes, and they want them reclassified as employees rather than student athletes in their files, including but not limited to their handbooks and rules. I'm going to focus in on handbooks because that's kind of the source of the complaint here from the NLRB. They are filing the complaint against the University of Southern California, future Big Ten member, the Pac-12 Conference, and the NCAA. When we talk about USC, they're talking about the USC handbook, where it says pretty simple stuff. You're talking about how you should conduct yourself on social media, how you should conduct yourself in interviews. And basically what the NLRB is saying is like, you're telling these kids to do too much. You're overlooking, you're telling them what to do when they're not your employees. They're really nitpicking here, if you ask me. I think it is a nitpicking situation to get to the end game where this committee apparently wants to get to, and that's student athletes becoming employees. Okay? I was in student organizations in college. I was in student media. I was in student radio stations, student TV station, things like that. I was in leadership positions. I was paid a stipend to be in a leadership position, but I was also in the lower level membership positions as well. Whether you're in student media, whether you're in Shuts Club, whether you're in a fraternity, sorority, whatever student organization you're in at a campus, you are representing that school. So of course there's going to be a code of conduct. Of course there's going to be a handbook, especially with athletics. No one is put in more of a spotlight. No one probably represents a university more than college athletes, college football players, college basketball players. College athletes sometimes are the identity of some of these colleges and universities. So of course they would want a code of conduct. Of course they would want a handbook of how to go about your business on social media, how to conduct yourself in interviews. That's pretty basic stuff. And now for this complaint to come out, in my opinion, is a little bit of nitpicking. And man, based from that complaint in that handbook and jumping all the way to student athletes becoming employees, that's now where I want to transition. That's what I want to talk about. Because man, you are going down a rabbit hole. We are going to peel back layers of the onion, and we are peeling back so many layers, there ain't going to be no onion left. And as a guy that hates onions, I'm all about that. So let's peel back the layers of the onion. Okay, you want to be employees? You are going to be under scrutiny more than you already are, even in the NIL era. You talk about 18-year-olds, you talk about 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds. You're talking about an employment contract. You're talking about being able to be fired. You're talking about being able to maybe cut pay. You're talking about all the things. Just look at your regular job and look at the things that can happen when maybe your performance evaluation isn't up to snuff. And maybe they evaluate you and say, you know what, maybe you don't get that raise, because you just go through all of the things that goes with being an employee, and now you factor it in to an 18-year-old, to a 19-year-old, to a 20-year-old, and that's a lot to handle, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I think there's one key thing that I want to take away from this complaint: reclassifying from student athletes to employees, because once you cross that bridge, right, once Moonlight Graham steps over the gravel, the whole game completely changes. You are no longer students, because when the federal government gets their eyes on this, and you talk about how much time are you putting into strength and conditioning? How much time are you putting into film study? How much time are you putting into practice? Folks, that's going to add up real quick. It's going to add up to probably more than 30, maybe up to 40, maybe up to 50 hours a week. And if you're an employee, now we're talking about benefits. Now we're talking about increased pay. And you know who doesn't want any of that? You know who doesn't want to have to deal with any of that? Schools, universities, athletic departments. USC and the Pac-12 both put out statements saying that this would be a detriment to the future of college athletics. It would take away from the educational experience, because, folks, when you cross that line to becoming an employee, you sacrifice the student. Maybe they would have them take a class or a couple of classes, right? You always go back to the example of when Matt Leinart came back for his final season and the only class he took was ballroom dancing. You know, you always go back to that example, maybe just to justify them being in college and being there at the university. They got to take one class. They got to take two classes. But folks, employees is a totally different ballgame. College athletes right now are living in the best era they've ever lived in. They are living their best life right now. You talk about NIL. There are players making hundreds of thousands of dollars. There are some players making millions of dollars. And then we look at the transfer portal, right? The ability to transfer. If things aren't working out here, we are in a pro player time in the history of college athletics, where if things aren't looking good here, you can take control. The player in this agreement can take control and say, I want to go elsewhere to try to make things happen, to try to make the most of my college experience, to try to make the most out of my college career, to maybe vault myself in to the NFL draft or the NBA draft or whatever it be. If you enter into an employment contract, if you enter in, you've got to think that athletes and student athletes will organize. They will unionize. And with all of that comes a collective bargaining agreement. And you bet your butt that one of the first things that conferences, universities, whoever they make this CBA with, wherever the relationship is with, the first thing they're going to do is when you come to our school or when you play in our conference, you're going to sign a contract. Could be for a year, could be for 2 years, could be a year with a university or a school option, right? All these types of options, all these sorts of contracts that you see in professional sports would make their way to the 18-year-olds, to the 19-year-olds, kids fresh out of high school. And now we're talking about labor organizations. We're talking about CBAs at that level. That is a big time jump, even from NIL and where we sit right now. And you best believe the universities, the conferences are going to attack the transfer portal. They are going to look for commitment. Coming out of high school, you got to sign a 1-year deal, or maybe with an option, or a 2-year deal, or things like that. And it keeps going on and on and on from there. And then if the government gets more involved, they're going to want to know, How many hours exactly are you putting into strength and conditioning? How many hours are you putting into practice? How many hours are you putting into film study? That's going to add up to over 30 hours a week. That's going to add up to 40. Who knows how many hours a week that's going to add up to? You know what happens when you go above 30? I think it's 30 hours a week in this country. You get benefits. And what happens when you get benefits? The employer has to pay more. So we're talking about a salary. We're talking about benefits. We've been talking about the money all off season as it pertains to television contracts. Imagine taking that contract, let's just say for football just right now, and you're cutting 20 to 25% of it out of the university's pocketbook, out of their pocket, and you're putting it into the hands of the players' salaries. That's why universities, that's why conferences are investing so much into name, image, and likeness. Because if we got to a situation where schools or conferences or whoever it be had to pay salaries to employees, like this type of situation, like this complaint that the NLRB is coming up, they are going to make significantly less money. And what happens when a university has significantly less money? Less programs are able to be funded, right? You're talking about soccer. You're maybe talking about gymnastics. You're maybe talking about wrestling. You're talking about all rowing, crew. You're talking about all these other sports that the university provides. And if 25% of that football deal is going towards player salaries, there might be some programs that are cut. Tuition, books, fees, all of those rates go up. There is a cause and an effect. We are in an era right now where players are at the forefront, where players are the focus, where they can make as much money as they damn well please in an NIL deal. They can transfer if they don't deem whether it's right or whether it's wrong or whatever reason it's for. They can transfer right now one time, penalty free. We are in a pro player era. Concessions will have to be made in order. Concessions will have to be made in a potential CBA agreement down the line. You understand why the conferences don't want it. You understand why the schools don't want it. Right now, I don't see a ton of players really clamoring to unionize. I don't see a ton of players clamoring for student employment contracts. I don't see a lot of that right now because we're in an era where NIL has allowed us to think outside the box, where NIL has allowed us to be in a situation where players can be compensated for the way they play. So here's what I want to see, right? We got this problem potentially. What about a solution? We're just a mere couple of years into NIL. What about conference-wide NIL deals? What about maybe wearing a little patch on your jersey, Raising Cane's, the official sponsor of Big Ten football, and every player is a part of that deal that wears their patch on that uniform or something like that. That's just an example off the top of my head. I want to see NIL play out a little bit more before we dive into the benefits, before we dive into CBAs, before we dive into performance reviews and things like that. We are going in a totally different direction if we go down that road. I want to see NIL play out a little bit more. That's, I think, the sweet spot going forward. So universities can still invest into their other athletic programs. They can still invest into academic programs. They can use that money garnered by these television contracts and the money that they are able to bring in. They can use it to further academic research. They can further it academic programs. They can build new research centers and athletic facilities on campus to benefit the students at their universities, and tuition doesn't go up. That's why everybody at the school and the conference level are pro NIL right now. I want to hear what you guys think. What do you think about this? You think this is going to go very far, or you think this is it's just a complaint and it's just going to, nothing really is going to happen of it? Or would you like to see Big Ten athletes become Big Ten employees? Because there's a lot of layers to peel back if that indeed happens. I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.